Now, if there is such a leadership, the whole game changes overnight. And this is the problem I have both with Mr. Karujasuri and with Sajid. I mean, I like both these guys. I respect Karu very much. But, when they say, look, the party has to unite. I have spoken with the leader. I mean, I'm thinking, hello, I mean, he's the problem. What's the point in uniting with the problem? I mean, if somebody has if there's a cancer in the body of the UNP, you remove the cancer. You don't try to cure the illness while keeping it in there. So, at least learn from the TNA. Mr. Bigneshwan didn't want to be the chief minister, but Mr. Sambandhan and Mr. Subandran prevailed upon him to give leadership, to do his duty. Unfortunately, not only don't we have a Bigneshwan in the UNP, we don't have a Sambandhan and we don't have a Subandran. And if we do, I don't know what they're doing. So that is crucial. If that changes,
and that has to change as soon as possible.
It has to change as soon as possible, because otherwise it's too late. You will have the president increasingly becoming just the human face. The machine will not stop. You will have more valley areas in other parts. Next time it will be because of the kidney problem in Anuradhapura, or people who are demonstrating because of the dengue problem. You never know. And then it will be said that there was a third force, and that maybe it was the JVP or foreign force or I don't know who, except it wasn't the JVP that did the shooting in valley area. But these things can be organized. You can, the next time around, or even this time, I mean, I don't know how the inquiry will go, but you never know. The victims themselves may be the subject of the investigation rather than the perpetrators. But the world is watching. Navi Pillai is watching. The American embassy, I mean, this government has already allowed the American embassy to protest on two issues, to register their criticism on Valiveria and on Dharaniyagala. No, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's a shame. It's a shame. And that is only because of the way the authorities have handled things. There was a report out a few weeks ago, co-authored by Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State under President Clinton, and Mr. Richard Williamson, Special Envoy of the President of the United States to Southern Sudan, which incidentally is another country now. And that report was produced by three prestigious think tanks: the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Brookings Institution, and the United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., which incidentally had published me in 1997 with another story. This is on the responsibility to protect. And page 3 of the report says the countries studied were Libya, Syria, former Yugoslavia, the Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sri Lanka. Now that's the only one in which there has not been any foreign intervention so far, by the way. But it's there. I mean, we are one of the countries studied. Now this is not because Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, has nothing better to do. I mean, she's it was on her watch that Yugoslavia was broken up by NATO, by the way. She's a very serious person, and the people who run US foreign policy consider her sort of a guru. We have got Samantha Power, who is now US permanent representative on the Security Council, who has a very special interest in Sri Lanka. She came down to check out about war crimes. We have Susan Rice, former ambassador, who is now the National Security Advisor to President Obama. We have Mr. Manmohan Singh visiting the United States in September. I mean, talk about their stuff. But we are under scrutiny, and one of the main arguments is that a country's government and state, an army, have a responsibility to protect its citizens. And if it fails in that responsibility, or worse still, if it is itself responsible for attacks on the the citizens of that country, then the international community has a responsibility to step in. There's also, as we know, 2 resolutions on so-called war crimes committed by the Sri Lankan army. We prevented that. I was in front of that effort in 2009 in Geneva. We bought 3 years. We kept the war crimes thing out, but now it's back in. Now, Navi Pillai, who's coming here in 3 weeks, is going to be thinking, if this is what can happen in Gampaha in broad daylight, to Sinhalese, what must have happened to the Tamil people during the war? What must the casualties be? And if there's no independent inquiry on what happened in Gampaha, independent, credible inquiry, and the guilty are not brought to justice, then how can we count on any internal Sri Lankan inquiry? Therefore, the case is made for a UN-mandated international inquiry into war crimes and crimes against humanity. So the Sri Lankan armed forces are vulnerable, have been made vulnerable. The net may begin to descend because of somebody's decision that was made concerning Gampaha. That has to be rectified fast. There has to be an apology. There has to be an independent inquiry, and there have to be the results of the inquiry. We have to show that we can clean up our act. Otherwise, it will happen again, Mahina. It could be any issue. Anywhere, it could be students, it could be factory workers. It's happened before. Roshan
Yeah, that was at the free trade zone.
Free trade zone. What about the massacre in Valikada? One-sided, 27 dead by the next morning. There's too much stuff going on. If it becomes a habit to send in people who are trained to defend the country against an enemy, against civilians, then they start doing the same thing. And then we look very different in the eyes of the world community, by which I'm not just talking about public opinion, I'm talking about people who have already brought resolutions against us. There's scrutiny, and there's a machine.
Well, talking about the opposition, that's where the checks and balances come in, and that is very necessary in a democratic process. We spoke about the UMP, but we also have the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, who have been in the opposition for a very long time, as long as the UMP has. What do you think their role has been in this entire process, in this entire political framework, in this situation that is prevailing in Sri Lanka at the moment?
Mine, I've been watching...
How will you compare the UMP and the JVP right now?
Good question. Well, look, I mean, the UMP is a huge party. It still retains a much huger vote base than the JVP. But I've been watching the JVP guys while I was serving as a diplomat. I've been watching them online and so on. Because in the parliamentary debates and in debates in the media, such as television, the best representation of public interest consistently has been by the young JVP MPs and one or two guys who were MPs who are not, like Bimal Ratnak. I don't think he's an MP anymore. He's an exception. But the JVP guys in Parliament and one ex-JVP guy who went over with the FSP, Ajit Kumar.
Yeah.
But these guys, Sunil Handunetti, Vijita Herat especially, on Gampaha, all of these guys, they've been exemplary. Andhra Kumar Disanayake. They've been conducting themselves as responsible opposition politicians, disciplined, studying their stuff, raising public interest issues, talking sense. They've been doing very well. Now they've got a problem. Well, they've got more than one problem, but they have a problem. Their leader, Mr. Somavan Samarasinghe, I mean, he's a very experienced guy, he's a moderate guy, but I mean, look, you can't have that individual as the public face of an electoral party. I mean, he should be the senior advisor or head of international relations or something. He can't be the leader, the public face of the JVP. There has to be somebody else. I mean, it could be Tilvin Silva, who's been the General Secretary. I don't know. But they've got to do something about that if they're serious. This is one thing. The second thing, of course, they have to be more self-critical about their own past. They have to be more honest about that. They've got to take a look at themselves. But they and the FSP just have to get their act together, because it's obvious that the state has a tendency to try to frame both these guys. And they're going for one and the other. They tried to link them up with the LTT at one point. Lalit and Kugan got disappeared by somebody. And the FSP and the JVP must realize that now with Vimal Veeramansa long gone and the ultranationalists gone away from the JVP, they must have some structured understanding. They don't have to be a single party again. They don't have to get married again, but they have to have some kind of relationship. And if they don't, they're both going to be targeted. And I know this because when I was serving as ambassador in Paris, of course all the instructions come through me. It gets to my desk, anything that comes from Colombo. And one of my officers had received an official instruction from an organization that I shall not name, saying, provide us a report on the links between the JVP, FSP and LTT in France. And I called this officer and said, hey, how are you going to provide a report on something that we don't know exists? Do we have any information that there is a relationship between the JVP, LTT and FSP? Not as far as I know. So don't tell lies. First you find out whether there's any intel on this, and then you report. I said, let's not create fictions which are dangerous. Because after July 83, 30 years ago, the first thing the government did was go on the basis of a bogus police report that the JVP had something to do with July 83, which it did not. It had nothing to do with it. And the JVP was banned. It's the UNP guys who had something to do with it. If anybody had anything to do with Gampaha, it was the people who did the shooting, not the JVP. They didn't shoot anyone. But the JVP was banned, and then they went underground, and then they re-emerged as a very barbaric force, and there was a civil war, and they had to be put down, and I'm glad they were put down. But they had nothing to do with July 83. So there is a similar attempt to scapegoat either the JVP or the FSP. Look at that guy, Sanjeeva Bandara. How many times he's been taken into custody? For what? Nobody, Dharanigala, who raped people, was taken into custody. But Sanjeeva Bandara has been taken into custody a couple of times. So they're going for, the deep state is going for these two, trying to link them up with existent or non-existent LTT guys. And if the JVP and the FSP have any sense, and I think they do, they have to sink their differences. How can they're saying they can unite the North and South. If they can't unite with each other, how can they unite the North and South? They have to make whatever changes in leadership personalities that are necessary, negotiate a deal, and have some alliance for the sake of their cadre, themselves, and for the people, because any country needs a strong left, not necessarily in government or even as the leading opposition, though of course in Latin America, in situations such as we have here, with a weak opposition, it is the left that has come onto center stage and has formed the governments in many countries, ex-revolutionaries. Dilma Rousseff, Brazil, Mujica, Uruguay. These are all ex-revolutionaries. They are democratic leftists who have won. It can be done. I'm not saying it can be done or should be done in Sri Lanka, but Greece, with the economic crisis, Syriza, a new left party led by a charismatic young guy. That's the main opposition. It can be done here. These JVP guys and these FSP guys, including activists like Dimuthu Artigala, they did very well. There was a guy called Varuna Rajapaksa, I don't know what's happened to him. Pubudu Jagoda, very bright young people. We need them, but they've got to get their act together. They've got to clean up the act, and they've got to get it together and come forward as a kind of a left caucus which can drive the process in a cleaner and fairer direction. It's very necessary.